Welcome back to day 9 of the TryHackMe Advent of Cyber 2024. My name's Aaron, aka Cyber Sensei Aaron, and today we're going to be talking about GRC. It's a little bit more on like the compliance and understanding risk for the business and stuff like this. It is important, but for me, I personally like being hands-on in the security, like blue team or red team side. So compliance is kind of just not my thing, but it is important to know. And if you did get into this and you did like doing it, you can get a lot of money by doing this because it's going to help you overall. So we'll go ahead and read the story here just so we're up to date. But McSkitty and Glitch want to hire an e-discovery company to process some forensic data for their investigation. They have invited bids from third parties for this purpose. 3 companies have bid for the project. McSkitty and Glitch now need to do a risk assessment on all 3 of these companies to identify the one with the least amount of risk so they can move forward. All 3 companies are required to fill out a questionnaire based on which a risk assessment will be done. Cool. So what is GRC? Let me just move this down. It's governance, risk, and compliance, and it plays a crucial role in any organization, right? It's to ensure that their security practices align with their personal, regulatory, and legal obligations. So GRC is used to ensure that companies are compliant with regulations, laws for certain things, especially in the finance industry or processing of personally identifiable information, PII, or HIPAA, which is the health side. It's really important for these people and organizations to keep this data as secure as they possibly can, because leaks or breaches of this data can cause significant damage to the people or the organization that is holding the data, right? So that's why it's super important for GRC to be a thing, is because we need to make sure companies are at least doing the minimum possible, right? And there's a couple examples here in the financial sector. So we got reserve bank regulations. So in most countries, banks have to adhere to security regulations set forth by the country's reserve bank, and this ensures that your money pretty much stays as safe as possible. The SWIFT CSP, banks use SWIFT network to communicate with each other and send funds. And it looks like there was a massive breach which resulted in 81 million fraudulent SWIFT transfer. And this created the standard for people having a secure network to transfer and send money. And then also data protection. So governance, diving into there, it's a function that creates a framework that an organization uses to make decisions regarding information security. So it's a creation of the organization's security strategy, policies, standards, and practices in alignment with the organization's overall goal. Risk is the function that helps to identify, assess, quantify, and mitigate risks in an organization's IT assets. Risk helps the organization understand potential threats and vulnerabilities. So risk is kind of where you're understanding where your security holes lie and the impact they're going to have on your organization. And then compliance is essentially being in compliance with the laws or the regulatory rules that your organization has, depending on the industry you're in. And a few of them, we have GDPR, and we have NIST and ISO 27001. Those are just a few of the different ones. So here's an introduction to risk assessments. So before McSkitty and Glitch choose an e-discovery company to handle their forensic data, they need to figure out which one is the safest choice. This is where a risk assessment comes in. It's a process to identify potential problems before they happen. Think of it as checking the weather before going on a hike. If there's a storm coming, you'd want to know ahead of time so you can either prepare or change your plans. So why are risk assessments done? Risk assessments can be done internally or externally. McSkitty and Glitch are doing a risk assessment of the companies that are bidding to handle their forensic data. So why are they done, right? Well, they connect cybersecurity to the bigger picture, which minimizes business risk. So in other words, it's not just about securing data, but about protecting the business as a whole. Because if you don't know where your vulnerabilities lie, how could you ever patch them? And if your vulnerabilities remain present, you could suffer a breach, which hurts the organization's reputation. Performing a risk assessment here, we're going to learn a little bit about performing risk assessments. So the first part is identification of risks, right? We have to understand what kind of risks we're dealing with, where they are, and all that kind of stuff. So we have to identify the factors that can cause revenue or reputation loss resulting from cyber threats. The exercise requires carefully assessing the attack surface of the organization and identifying areas which might be used to harm the organization. So things like an unpatched web server, misconfigured software, misconfigured cloud permissions, user permissions, high privilege user account without proper security controls, so like an admin account that has a password set to never expire, or a third-party vendor who might be infected by a malware connecting to the organization network. So you have to be wary of your third-party vendors as well, because that is another hole that people can move laterally through. A system for which support has ended by the vendor and it is still in production. So end-of-life systems, pretty much it comes to a point where a vendor will say, hey, we're no longer going to release updates or security patches to this software or this piece of equipment. You have to upgrade to our new one, and we're going to be supporting that one. But a lot of the times what happens is people will build stuff on old tech, and they can't upgrade because if they did, it wouldn't work, one, or it would just be a significant amount of investment, which the company sometimes might not be willing to do. So you have to deal with these certain things, because in the real world, it's easy to say, okay, just patch all the holes, but in the real world, it's really, really difficult to get that done, because there's a lot of moving parts in an organization. Especially the bigger the organization is, the more difficult it is to implement this kind of security controls. So the next step here is assigning a likelihood to each risk. So once we identify all the risks that are out there in the organization, we have to identify the likelihood of each risk occurring, right? So we have 5 here: improbable, remote, occasional, probable, and frequent. So 1 to 5, pretty straightforward. Improbable means it's not unlikely, it's very unlikely to happen, or maybe never. Remote, very unlikely. Occasional, likely to happen. Probable, likely to happen several times. Frequently, will happen regularly. You just got to come in here and decide, okay, is this risk going to happen a lot? Is there easy exploitability here, etc. Then we have to assign impact to each risk. So what would happen if this event did occur? How much would it impact the business? That's the question you're asking right there. And we have 1 to 5, informational to critical. If you work in a SOC, you are very familiar with these terms. You can read what they mean there. Obviously, depending on the impact rating is the priority we're going to assign, right? So critical and highs are going to always take priority over medium, low, and informational. Then risk ownership. So this is the last step, right, in the risk assessment. And we have to decide what to do with the risks that were found. So what we're going to do is perform some calculations. And the simplest calculation that is typically done is the risk multiplied with the impact of the risk to get a score. And some use this one, some use other ones. It just depends. There's a whole bunch of risk ownership for things out there. Essentially, to sum this whole section up, what we're doing is basically determining whether we can mitigate or we're just going to accept the risk as it is, right? So for example, if we find something that is improbable but it's a medium, most likely the business will just accept that risk, and basically if it did get exploited, they would pay whatever they got to pay for the violation. But the reason they're accepting it is because it's very unlikely to happen or may never happen. So instead of investing money and time into fixing that when they can fix something that's maybe a frequent but low, then they would prioritize the low frequent over the improbable medium, because it's just not likely that will ever be an issue. And that's kind of risk ownership, right? Is deciding what to take action on and what to accept as risk in the business. So then here we talked about internal third-party assessments. So they're not done just internally. You can have external organizations be done. Here's why they do it. So we talked about this: identify weak spots, direct resources to the most important areas, and to stay compliant, make sure they're not in violation of any rules or regulations. And why do companies do risk assessments of third parties? Well, they don't just assess themselves, they have to assess their vendors, right? Suppliers, partners, because ultimately, let's just say, like in my job, I actually came across a phishing email that was from a vendor that we used, but the vendor was compromised, and they were sending phishing emails from the actual domain of the vendor, but it was a phishing email, so we knew it was compromised. So what we did was we had to block the vendor's sending address, and then we notified them that they were compromised, and then we pretty much do another assessment in like 90 days to see if they fixed the issue or not. If they did not, they remain blocked. If they did, then we can unblock them. So it's something like that, right? You always got to be auditing your vendors, partners, suppliers as well, because they can be compromised, right? Like maybe you're taking security seriously, but your vendor or supplier is not. They get compromised, and now the attacker can laterally move into your system via phishing email from the vendor, and yeah, just can get really nasty really fast. So that's why assessments are super important, and GRC in general is very important, because it's just making sure that we're doing the most we can to secure the information that we're dealing with. So what we're doing in this task is we're doing basically a risk assessment. So what does GRC stand for? We know it stands for governance, risk, and compliance. So it's pretty simple, and we have to do the risk assessment to get the flag. So I'm gonna move this over here. Alright, so vendor 1 is Silverhawk. So question 1. Data in transit and data at rest needs to be encrypted with AES encryption as a requirement for this project. What type of AES encryption does your company use for data in transit and data at rest? None for data in transit, and AES 256 for data at rest. So that's that's pretty interesting. They only secure the data at rest, not in transit. So man in the middle attack could be a potential here, right? Someone could come onto their network and see all the unencrypted data being transferred over the network. It just wouldn't be able to see the data at rest. So describe the potential risk. I'm gonna say man in the middle attack, and then the impact level would be I want to say it's like a high, because if we're sending sensitive data over the network, like company secrets or personal PII or HIPAA information, then they can get their eyes on this, and that's very, very bad. And we're gonna put it at possible. We're gonna add the risk. So it says assessment could be improved. Your assessment indicates a lower risk than expected. So what kind of access controls do you have to ensure data is accessed only by authorized people? Data can be accessed only on a need-to-know basis. So that's good. Need to know. Identify potential security risk. I mean, I guess the only way that there would be a security risk is someone was impersonating someone who needed to know. I mean, that's kind of what I'm thinking here. So I'm going to say the impact level would be critical, but it's very unlikely. It's very unlikely to happen because if it's need to know, or I guess I'll put it on possible, because if it's need to know, then they're gonna make sure that you have, like, you actually need to know the information. So just say impersonation. So impact is right, likelihood. Oh, my assessment indicates higher risk than expected. That's fine. How long do you keep the client data after the case is closed? Less than 1 week. So that's pretty good, but I feel like that's kind of short. I don't know. Investigation impediment. Because, like, if they're keeping the data less than 1 week, and let's say a court, like 90 days later, they discover they were breached, but and they needed for some reason to look at the client data, they wouldn't have it. I don't know. Let's just complete that. All right, so this is the answer for question run. It's going to be high impact and likely to occur. Alright, so question 2. Data can be accessed only on a need-to-know basis. We determined impersonation is going to be the only way that this could be vulnerable. And if someone did succeed with this, it would be critical because they would have classified information. But it is very unlikely to happen because it's very difficult to impersonate someone that people know who they are, what they look like, what they sound like. So question 3 was, we determined that investigation impediment was going to be kind of the vulnerability. That would be critical because obviously impeding in investigations of felony. It's very unlikely to happen. So add that risk. Complete. I kind of do it for another vendor. AS256 for data in transit, and I would say none here. Yeah, I don't really see a security risk there. I don't know, man. Question 2: data can be accessed by all people in the information. So sensitive data leak. Those are the 2 vulnerabilities that I'd say here, and that would be critical and very likely. Because if everyone can access all the information in the organization, that is not good, because there's certain information that some people shouldn't have, and you shouldn't be able to access information from other teams or other parts of the organization that don't pertain to your job. So that was the easier one. And these guys are less than a week as well. So there you have it. It's critical but very unlikely to happen. Alright, going to the last vendor here. Breach. So they have in transit, but none for the data at rest. So that means if they did get breached, someone would have to, don't be able to read all the information, right? This actually happened to Equifax. They were storing all the PII in literally plain text documents, and they did get breached, and it was leaked. It's pretty cool. Alright, so it's going to be high. It's a significant impact, and it is possible to occur. It is more difficult to access data at rest than it is to access data in transit, just due to the fact that you do have to gain access to the organization systems and network, and that's a lot more difficult to do than it is to do data in transit. So go ahead and go to question 2 here. What kind of access controls do you have to ensure data? So we know from the last one, data leak, sensitive data leak. So again, critical. And the last one, so same here. Investigation impediment. Yep, so same as the last one. So it looks like the best vendor right now, it's actually Silverhawk. Because of their question 2 right now, they have a need to know basis. The only thing that's tough is question 1. But review the risk scores and select a vendor with the lowest risk. They literally all have the same risk, bro. Yeah, so it was Silverhawk, which I was saying before. But yeah, that is risk assessment, guys. Would not recommend it at all. So we'll go ahead and put the flag in here. But yeah, guys, that's pretty much it. To recap, we did a risk assessment of 3 vendors for McSkitty and Glitch. We determined that Silverhawk was going to be the best one out of all of them. Appreciate you guys stopping by again. Leave a like, subscribe. Tune in for the next one. Day 10 is definitely going to be a lot more entertaining, just because we're actually getting back into like exploitation and that good stuff. So we're actually doing a fishing thing. So cool, guys. Appreciate you guys stopping by. Share this with a friend that you think would benefit from this knowledge. And this has been Aaron. Peace.